It was footage that was hard to forget. A white, self-styled militiaman roaming the streets in the midst of violent protests. Kyle Rittenhouse was chased by anti-racism protesters and shot to death with his assault rifle. Today, an all-white jury cleared him of murder in a case that has divided America.
Kyle H. Rittenhouse, not guilty.
President Biden said he felt angry and concerned, but accepted the jury's verdict. Now America braces for what might come next. Also on News at 10. Austria heads back into full lockdown and warns all citizens they must be vaccinated by February by law.
Well, it's hard before Christmas, of course, but I think it's the only way at the moment.
We failed utterly. The England Cricket Board offers Azim Rafiq an abject apology.
Racism and discrimination is a blight on our game. To Azim and all of those who have suffered or experienced any form of discrimination in our sport, we are truly sorry.
Welcome to 3029 Brickell Avenue, the home of Gunther VI.
And it's a dog's life, but not as we know it.
It came down to our boss, the wealthiest animal in the world, a German Shepherd named Gunther, had to sign off with his approval on us listing this property.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. As the 5 not guilty verdicts were read out in court today, Kyle Rittenhouse began to shake before dropping to his knees. His case has shaken America and clearly has the potential to cause further ruptures in a deeply polarized nation. The teenager took to the streets of Kenosha last summer, armed with a semi-automatic rifle after, at times, violent protests broke out following the police shooting of a black man, Jacob Blake. Rittenhouse said he was there to protect property and ended up shooting 3 people, killing 2 of them. He claimed self-defense and was acquitted, a verdict which President Biden said would leave many Americans angry, himself included. Tonight, National Guard troops are on standby amid fears that anger could spark yet more violence.
The defendant will rise to face the jury and hearken to its verdicts.
In a trial that has gripped and divided America, this was the moment when the teenage vigilante-style gunman learned of his fate.
As to the 5th count of the information, Gage Grosskreutz, we the jury find the defendant, Kyle H. Rittenhouse, not guilty.
Members of the jury, are these your unanimous verdicts?
Collapsing and hyperventilating after his acquittal, Kyle Rittenhouse embraced his lawyer in relief and gratitude.
Okay, folks, your job is done,
and... The incident had unfolded last summer at the height of civil rights protests, following the police shooting of Jacob Blake in the Midwestern town of Kenosha. The African-American man was shot multiple times in the back, but survived. That ignited protests and brought both demonstrators and vigilantes onto the streets of this small Wisconsin town. And among them was the 17-year-old Kyle Rittenhouse, armed with an AR-15.
We don't have non-lethal.
Having declared we don't have non-lethal, the infamous clash occurred. Chased down the street, Rittenhouse fell to the ground and opened fire. Within seconds, 2 people were dead. Another was badly wounded.
I was cornered from in front of me.
The trial of the teenage gunman has riveted America.
There were 3 people right there.
For it has played into the partisan politics of this moment. As he left the scene that night, was Rittenhouse a trigger-happy far-right teenager? Or just a patriot trying to stop mob violence?
Hey, he just shot them! Hey, dude right here just shot them!
Even at the time when we were in Kenosha after the shooting, Rittenhouse was dividing opinion.
I say free Kyle.
Free Kyle, yeah.
Free Kyle Rittenhouse.
It was illegal, though.
He was criminal. No, he wasn't.
He was a patriot.
He was running for the patriot. That man is a patriot, and he's a hero, and he's going to be exonerated.
His defenders said he had every right to open fire.
Kyle Rittenhouse is the hero of Kenosha.
That argument continues tonight, as the uncle of Jacob Blake spoke to reporters.
We deserve the respect of this country. We deserve to walk the streets of this country. We deserve to march and rally peacefully without having our supporters murdered in the streets.
Although a small crowd is gathered outside the courthouse, there is no sign of any further trouble in the town. But what this case has highlighted is the polarizing role of vigilantes and militias in American life.
Who exactly are you?
I'm an American.
Emboldened in the Trump years, as we saw for ourselves in multiple states, the verdict today will be seen by them as a vindication of their right to carry weapons on the streets of American cities and to interpret self-defense in broad terms. Kyle Rittenhouse can now resume his life, but as he left court tonight, the arguments are still raging about his role and about last summer's tumultuous protests.
And Robert joins us from Washington. Robert, look, there are so many questions, honestly, I could ask you about that report. You know, what is the role of militias? Who's enforcing law and order in America? But it's clear that it divided America, this case, and still is.
Very much, Tom. Yeah, it's absolutely polarizing America tonight. Progressives, Democrats, African-American leaders expressing outrage, saying this was a miscarriage of justice, alleging that the criminal justice system protects white supremacy, and referencing how Kyle Rittenhouse wept as on the witness stand during the trial. One Democratic congressman here has said that those were white tears of a murderer. And an advisor to former President Obama, Ben Rose, has said that this sends out a chilling and dark message to heavily armed vigilantes all over America. On the other side of the chasm, Tom, Republicans, conservatives, gun rights activists are embracing this verdict, and indeed Rittenhouse himself. One right-wing congressman from North Carolina has said that the lesson is this: you have a right to defend yourself. Be armed, be dangerous, be moral. And at the same time, those on the right are attacking President Biden for having described and categorized Rittenhouse as a white supremacist. So whether there's trouble on the streets over the next few days of American cities, that's difficult to know, but it certainly has proved politically inflammatory.
OK, Robert, for now, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's come back here. And if you thought lockdowns were a thing of the past and good riddance to them, then this might somewhat chill your bones. Austria is heading back into full lockdown. Yes, the full 9 yards. And more than that, the government in Vienna has told all its citizens they must be vaccinated by February by law. Germany may be about to follow suit with a lockdown, which leaves us with one disturbing question. Is there any chance we might have to do the same?
For Austrians, the winter of 2021 is beginning to look an awful lot like the winter of 2020. The Christmas markets in Vienna have opened, but not for much longer, as the country heads back into full lockdown. Stay-at-home orders will be in place from Monday morning, even for the fully vaccinated. Working from home, pubs, restaurants and many shops shut once again. The fourth wave of COVID has arrived, and arrived quickly. Countries that seem to be doing well are suddenly being hit very hard. Austria now has double the UK's number of cases per head, and its hospitals are overwhelmed. The country's chancellor is taking Austria back to a place they thought they'd left far behind, and he's blunt as to why. Despite months of efforts, he told his fellow Austrians, despite all the media campaigns, we did not manage to convince enough people to get vaccinated. On the streets of the capital, many have given his actions today their reluctant approval.
I think it's a very hard decision.
At the Oval today.
But the decision is okay, but it's a little bit too late. It has to be in September.
Well, it's hard before Christmas, of course, but I think it's the only way at the moment. Hopefully it will be opened in the middle of December again.
A freedom that will soon be taken away. There were long queues at the vaccine centre in Vienna this evening, and by February It will be mandatory for all Austrians to be jabbed, the first country in Europe to go down the compulsion route. In much of the German-speaking world, vaccine resistance has been high, which has given the virus an easy ride in re-establishing itself as the winter cold weather has arrived. While the UK's case rate has remained fairly stable, in some countries, such as Germany and the Netherlands, infections have soared. In Austria, the increase is the starkest, with an average of more than one person in every 100 testing positive each day for the last week. That's perhaps explained by Austria's vaccination rate being one of the lowest in Western Europe. And while Germany has administered fewer than 4 million booster doses, the UK has already given more than 14 million. Germany, especially in the south, could soon be heading the same way as Austria. They're trying to step up their vaccination programme, but the slow rollout of the booster third jabs is contributing to a problem that Chancellor Merkel today described as really concerning. The contrast with much of southern Europe is stark. This was the traditional November fiesta in the Spanish town of Benidorm yesterday. Tens of thousands partying with no restrictions. It's much the same in Portugal and Italy, where although cases are beginning to rise, the very high number vaccinated is keeping the situation manageable. For now, at least. James Mates, News at 10.
And I'm joined by Emily to talk about all this. It's deja vu all over again. Look, I think most people watching this will think, we thought all this was behind us. Lockdowns, you know, and all the rest of it, not to mention kind of enforced vaccination. I mean, is there any chance it could happen here? What do you make of it?
Do you know what? I don't think there is much chance of it happening here. I think things do not look good in Europe, that is for sure. But I do not think this is a case of us next. Things here are really different to how they are over there, and I think Europe is simply behind us. If you remember, back in early autumn, in September, we had really high cases of COVID. It ripped through schools, it spread to the community, and it was happening just at a time when the immunity from our vaccines was beginning to wane. Because of that, we now have really high levels of natural immunity in our country, and we have a booster programme that is really, really effective. 14 million people have been boosted, and our case rate is now falling. Europe, of course, vaccinated its populations much later than us, so they're simply going through what we did back in the autumn. Those who are vaccinated, their immunity is beginning to wane, and in places like Austria, where they have very low uptake of vaccine, they are obviously going to suffer more. So booster programmes in Europe are going to be really important. I think one worry for us, though, is that we have a complete reliance on the vaccine. We have no other controls. So if our booster programme stalls, that could be a problem. Another worry is new variants. If one crops up in a country that has really high rates in Europe, that could also be a problem. But I think in the short term, if we all get boosted, it's unlikely we're going to have any other lockdowns.
I'm going to note down November the 19th, Emily Morgan predicts no lockdown. To be discussed further. Now, there were more apologies from the top of cricket today over the racism scandal, first highlighted by Azim Rafiq. A blight on our game, the head of the ECB called it after emerging from crisis talks. Alongside the contrition came a promise of action with a 12-point plan to be published next week. In the meantime, another former England star found himself the focus of the latest chapter in this sorry episode.
At the Oval today, cricket bosses looked deep into the soul of the sport they run, a sport in turmoil over a racism scandal that escalates by the day. Former England captain Sir Andrew Strauss clear of the task ahead.
Well, we've got a lot of work to do, there's no doubt about it.
They met just hours after former England cricketer Alex Hales apologised for painting his face black for a fancy dress party 12 years ago.
I obviously realise that this is incredibly disrespectful, and I want to apologise for the offence that this has no doubt caused. It was incredibly reckless and foolish on my behalf.
Hales was already under investigation for claims made by Azim Rafiq during his harrowing evidence to MPs earlier this week.
I know that the pain that I went through for them few months, no one can ever put me through that pain again.
Rafiq made an apology of his own yesterday after anti-Semitic messages he sent to another player in 2011 were unearthed and made public.
Azim Rafiq's comments and subsequent apology just reinforce the scale of the crisis being discussed here today. Racism has clearly been allowed to fester in cricket for some time, and even at the end of this week, it's unlikely we know the full extent of it.
After 5 hours of talking, they emerged with a promise of urgent action and an apology to Rafiq and all who've suffered like him.
Sure. Azim Rafiq has shone a light on our game that has shocked, shamed and saddened us all. Racism and discrimination is a blight on our game. To Azim and all of those who have suffered or experienced any form of discrimination in our sport, we are truly sorry. Our sport did not welcome you. Our game did not accept you, as we should have done. We apologise unreservedly for the suffering you have faced.
The action plan to emerge today contained platitudes about inclusion, diversity and leadership. They've promised more details next week, and they'll need to be radical to convince the sceptics that cricket as it exists now can change, and change quickly. Steve Scott, News at 10 at the Oval.
The double child killer Colin Pitchfork has been arrested and sent back to prison over a breach of his licence conditions. Pitchfork was controversially freed in September after spending 33 years behind bars for the rape and the murder of 2 teenage girls in the 1980s. He was recalled to prison because he exhibited concerning behaviours. A government source said it will be years, not months, before he is back on the streets. After a rough couple of weeks, to say the least, the government could do without another crisis. So, signs of progress in negotiations with the EU over the Northern Ireland Protocol will be welcome. The UK wants to change the post-Brexit deal because it's disrupting trade and had threatened to suspend it. But today, talks were said to be more constructive, and Libby is here to talk about all this. Look, I guess part of the problem with this is that it may not be working as they wanted, but it was the deal that the Prime Minister negotiated. So, what do you make of the change of tone?
Well, remember 2 years ago, almost exactly, the Prime Minister was campaigning around the country saying, vote for me and get Brexit done. In one important respect, Brexit has not been done, and that is in relation to Northern Ireland, how the protocol works there. And today we had the 5th round of talks between the UK and the EU to try and resolve this issue. Afterwards, Lord Frost, the Brexit minister, said significant gaps remain. But what we've heard much less of in recent days is talk of triggering Article 16. That's effectively the nuclear option of tearing up the protocol and risking a trade war with the EU. And I think one reason for that is that the issue of trust has surfaced in the last few weeks in a way we haven't seen before in relation to Boris Johnson. The question of whether he misled his own MPs over Owen Paterson, the question this week as to whether he misled voters in the north over his plans for high-speed rail. And I think the last thing that he wants is for people now to be suggesting that he may not be trustworthy when it comes to getting Brexit done. OK, let's see. Now,
Libby, thank you very much indeed. So, soaring wholesale gas prices have hit energy companies hard recently, with some unable to survive, as you'll have seen. In total, 2.5 million customers have seen their supplier vanish since the summer. And that's bad news for everyone, the boss of British Gas told us today. He said the knock-on effect could result in £100 being added to all of our bills.
Out like a light, record wholesale gas prices have led to a string of energy firms disappearing from the market. Less well known is that even if you're not one of their customers, the crisis will cost you money. This mum is already struggling, but when firms go bust, there's a cost, which over time is passed on to bills, no matter what firm you're with.
The money that I budgeted to go in now doesn't cover it, which is why money's had to come out of other things like luxuries to cover that cost. Otherwise, then I have to go begging to people to help me. It's hard.
Energy firms with almost 2.5 million customers have collapsed since August. Surviving firms took on their customers, guaranteeing credit balances and supplies. These companies can recoup costs from an industry fund, paid from all our bills, so far estimated to be £2.5 billion, which could add £100 to every bill in the sector.
Utility Point recognises members for their loyalty.
The impact of energy companies like this failing comes on top of price rises due to increased wholesale costs. The chief executive of the UK's biggest power firm wants tougher checks on companies' business plans in future.
The cost of these failures are socialised across the entire customer base of the UK.
It's very hard to argue that that is fair, that customers of companies like British Gas are subsidising the customers of companies that have failed. The regulations that we've got today, I don't think any party would argue are working as they have been intended.
Comparison sites often encourage people to switch to the cheapest deals, but should they have been more careful? Shouldn't people like you have done more to check out the financial viability of these companies before switching customers?
That's absolutely something that we do. We do not work with all suppliers, we work with a select few, and there is a process that we go through to understand who's the right supplier to work with.
Officials say new regulations are being considered, but as we enter the period of maximum energy use, many experts predict more suppliers will collapse. Chris Choi, News at 10.
The mystery surrounding the missing Chinese tennis player Peng Shuai, who accused a former government minister of sexual assault, took another twist today when photos of her were published on social media. A journalist working for the government-controlled broadcaster said they were posted on Peng's WeChat messaging app. But there's been scepticism about their authenticity. It follows the release of an email claiming to have been sent by her, saying she was safe. For a whole year, Indian farmers have camped outside Delhi protesting over new agricultural laws, which they say threaten their livelihoods. Well, today it would appear their demands have finally been met. In a surprise announcement, Prime Minister Narendra Modi backed down and said he would repeal the legislation.
Celebrations on the streets of Delhi today after a year of protests. Through the searing heat of summer, through the waves of COVID, and now the onset of winter. Nothing deterred India's rural farmers against Prime Minister Modi's controversial farm reform laws. They are natural supporters of Prime Minister Modi's style of Hindu nationalism, but for a year they've been camped out in central Delhi, vehemently opposed to his program to open Indian farming to private corporations. Today, in a major climb down, Mr. Modi announced a huge U-turn.
Guru Nanak Dev Ji ka pavitra prakash parv hai.
Prime Minister Modi urged the farmers to return home, saying that on a holy Sikh holiday, his government acknowledged the farm reforms had failed and that they'd be repealed.
Pure desh ko
Rajaram Yadav, a farmer outside Delhi, told us Prime Minister Modi's laws were wrong and today's decision had made farmers like him happy. Dinaman Mahant said the Modi government's laws were against farmers like him and should have been removed earlier, especially because other farmers had lost their livelihoods opposing them. Opposition to Prime Minister Modi's land reforms went well beyond India. Last year, I interviewed Booker Prize winner Arundhati Roy about it. And global pop superstar Rihanna went on social media against it too. This is a significant political setback for Modi. Not only has his government effectively watered down the climate change agreement in Glasgow this month by committing to more coal-fired power stations, but he is now on the back foot domestically ahead of national elections next year. Raghu Omar, News at 10.
Back here, nearly 2 million disabled people could be in line for a backdated benefits payout. It's because they're on so-called legacy benefits like job seekers allowance, meaning, unlike those receiving universal credit, they didn't get any extra help during the pandemic. Campaigners say that was discriminatory and have been making their case at the High Court. According to figures shared with us by the charity Scope, the financial pressures of COVID meant disabled people were 4 times as likely to fall into food poverty.
In good times, making ends meet is tough for Samantha Pearman. In bad, the pandemic and poverty together robbed her of dignity.
I've got mobility problems due to back injuries, I'm partially sighted, and it's just that we've just been forgotten. I've had food bank parcels come in.
Samantha is now £800 in debt. She relies on employment support allowance, a benefit for disabled people out of work. She says the increased cost of services and deliveries she relies on is one of the many reasons an uplift was needed, similar to universal credit, which was increased by £20. she's dreading this winter.
I'm fearing that we're all going to be cold, damp, miserable, and I fear for that big bill that's going to be coming in around about March time. And how will I pay that off? Yeah.
Campaigners have taken their case to the High Court. They call it discrimination against disabled people. Victory could mean back payments of £1,500. Paula Peters has rheumatoid arthritis and other health issues. She struggled over the past 18 months.
It's been a really, I don't want another year like that.
The government won't comment on the case, but they've told us that disabled people have for some time been free to switch to universal credit if they feel it would make them better off. But in the complex world of benefit calculation, many know it would have left them even poorer.
I live in a one-bedroom flat with my 2 cats and my 2 sons.
Matt Leo believes he's been short-changed. The cupboard looks full, but only because the local food bank has just delivered.
It's been incredibly hard, really. We're saying that we're trying to level up the country, but we're not. Everyone who's disabled has always been looked down on.
Samantha Pearman says £20 a week would have made a world of difference. She's hoping the High Court agrees when it rules on the issue in the weeks ahead. Neil Connery, News at 10.
For a brief moment, history was made in the US today. For the first time, a woman took charge of the most powerful nation on earth. While Joe Biden was sedated during a routine colonoscopy, Vice President Kamala Harris assumed the powers of the president for around 85 minutes.
As a woman myself, I will note that, the president, when he selected her to be his running mate, obviously he knew he was making history that was long overdue in our view. And part of that was selecting someone who could serve by your side as your partner, but also step in if there was a reason to. And that includes the application of the 25th Amendment, as was done this morning.
After President Biden's return, he continued with important duties, including the traditional pardoning of 2 turkeys ahead of Thanksgiving. Which brings me to finally tonight take a look at this rather impressive property. Once home to Madonna, it comes with 9 bedrooms and waterfront views. The current occupant is a certain Gunther VI. And the thing about Gunther is he's a dog. A German shepherd, to be precise, and the latest in a bloodline of very well-poured pooches. He is apparently the world's richest dog, and his mansion has just gone on the market, asking price $31 million.
Welcome to 3029 Brickell Avenue, the home of Gunther VI.
It is a tale so barking mad, it could only happen in America. Gunther VI, the multi-millionaire German shepherd, putting his Miami mansion on the market 20 years after it was bought from Madonna. So say the real estate agents tasked with handling the sale.
It came down to our boss, the wealthiest animal in the world, a German shepherd named Gunther, had to sign off with his approval on us listing this property.
It's claimed this is just one of Gunther's international pads, inherited from his grandfather Gunther IV. Their wealth is said to have come from a mysterious German countess who left her fortune to Gunther III in 1992.
Pets are considered property, and therefore they cannot inherit property, they cannot own property.
But all may not be what it seems, according to one legal expert with plenty of experience in setting up trusts for pets who outlive their owners.
There are things I found on the internet where they have found that like 10 years ago, the people who are involved in it admitted that there never was such a person or such a dog. However, just because this is a PR stunt, I think the important thing is if you're a pet owner, go see your lawyer and make plans to take care of your pet when you die.
But the dog at the centre of what's suspected to be an elaborate stunt is making the most of his material world, sitting pretty and likely to accept cash or a down payment in bones. Martha Fairley, News at 10.
One of the most enjoyable but silliest stories of the year. Good night, have a brilliant weekend.